I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Welcome to episode 167 of the Time for Teachership podcast. Today, I am really excited to talk about some book-based unit ideas. So in this episode, I'm going to brainstorm how my latest favorite books, this is like 2023, early 2024, could become engaging units. So we're actually going to unpack 7 of my recent favorite books that I have read in the last year, as well as which subject area or areas this might work with in terms of a course, possible themes to explore, and possible activities for a unit that would be based on each of these books. Let's get to it. So why am I doing this episode? So you might have noticed I've been doing curriculum mini series, and they fall into 4 buckets. One of those is curriculum. So that's a big piece of the work that I do as an educational justice coach. And I'm really excited about books. So in my personal life, I read a lot of fiction. I read some nonfiction too, but I generally tend to listen to podcasts and audiobooks, but nonfiction, reading a physical book or an ebook. And I get most of my to be read list ideas from podcast episodes about books. So I love things like What Should I Read Next with Anne Bogle, which is awesome. The folks at BNT, Brave New Teaching, they do some episodes, since that's very education focused, they do some episodes that are very like, here's a unit about this text and here's the complementary text. And I love stuff like that. I also love different reading lists that we'll see online or curated selections based on theme or identity. I do love the folks at We Need Diverse Books and all of the resources that they put out and create. I would love to have them on the podcast. I'd love to have any of those folks on the podcast, any of the folks affiliated with any of those shows. So if you are listening or you know someone who is at those places, please connect me. I would love to do a series all with recommendations from other folks. So until I'm able to crowdsource or interview experts, like I just listed, for recommendations for K through 12 courses or units around books like that, I'm going to start with my own ideas. So that's why we're diving in today and really just kind of testing the waters with this type of episode. I would love to get your feedback on if it feels helpful to you in either as a curriculum planner yourself, a teacher, or a director of curriculum instruction, an instructional coach, someone who's like co-creating the curriculum, or from the perspective of a leader who is not directly tied to the creation of curriculum, but is more abstractly or more kind of at a distance coaching the process of curriculum development and really searching for some ideas for how to spark that innovation and curriculum design from something that actually may be of personal interest or maybe of a student's interest. Like, what could that possibly look like? I think so much of coaching is about painting the possible and brainstorming what it could be. And so what I think would be really cool for this is to just think through, listen as we kind of go and take it in as you are thinking about the realities of that curriculum design dynamic, whether that's you yourself or coaching someone else. And think through what are the questions I might ask, what are the prompts I might offer to get to the place where, I'm listing what is possible. And you might come up with a ton that I have missed. So please feel free to share with me any of those additional prompts, questions, thoughts about this. All right, here we go. So here are some book-based unit ideas. This is by no means an amazing or perfect list. There are many imperfections. As I said, this is a test episode. And so as a starting point, here's where I went. I went to the StoryGraph app, which I am now using as of 2024, 100% of the time. And I did the filter for books that I rated 5 stars. I don't know if Goodreads has that, but I do love the StoryGraph has that. And I specifically looked at the year 2023 because it was a little overwhelming to look at all of the books that I've rated 5 stars in the history of me rating books. So for the first 2 months of 2024, as we're recording this on March 6th, 2024, I just looked at January and February's books as well and included those. As I selected the books and I started putting kind of these ideas that I'm going to share with you into words, I was thinking about interesting topics. So what were the kind of topics of the book that really piqued my interest? Unique application ideas, like what are the actual activities students could do with this? How might this relate to traditional curriculum, or not traditional curriculum, but subject-specific curriculum and standards, I think is what I want to say. And also racial, gender, national, and geographic diversity, ideally with regards to author and character identity and setting. As I looked through these books specifically, not so much author. It's very white, mostly female authorship here, but character identity and setting was a factor. And so I think, again, as a test episode for this, I think this is why I want to look into additional books, go beyond just like what I read in 2023 that I liked. I have so many ideas for young adult fiction, particularly over the years, that would be a better list. And maybe I'll make that podcast episode next. I also want to, for that reason, crowdsource authors and crowdsource recommendations from folks like We Need Diverse Books to make sure that it is, we have lists and suggestions that do have more racial, gender, national, linguistic, geographic diversity with regards to authorship. Okay, with those notes, let's head into the first book. I read A Deadly Education, which is book number 1 in the Skullman series by Naomi Novik, who has a video game development past, which I found fascinating. And this is, I heard it described, I want to say on the What Should I Read Next podcast by a team as they were recommending books to buy for the December holiday season for younger kiddos. And I think it was described as kind of like Harry Potter, but darker, like a deadlier, darker version of Harry Potter. So it is set in a magical school, but definitely deadlier. And the characters are definitely more diverse, racially, linguistically, geographically, particularly. It is and they get into this a little bit in the book, but is a not perfect representation of the world's community. And for reasons, as I said, they'll go into, I don't want to use any spoilers here, but far more diverse and representative of the world than a lot of books. And so that's an intentional decision, and it factors actually really closely into the plot of the book. So I think this could be an interdisciplinary history ELA unit. You'll see that is my default because those are the things that I taught. I'm super excited to hear book recommendations and other ideas for other curricular units, but I think the patterns still apply. So keep that in mind as you listen. Theme to explore for this particular book, but also honestly, all 3 books in the series are amazing. I don't think you're probably going to do all of them, but if you have those kiddos who want to continue on their own, really good series to get them into. But a theme to explore in this one and throughout the rest of the series is kind of the question, is it ever okay to sacrifice a life if it saves an entire community? And actually, just on my run this morning, I was listening to a Pod Save the People episode, and they were talking about rugged individualism as this principle that the United States particularly holds up as this, perfect thing. And they quoted Fannie Lou Hamer, and I believe in 1971 speech, where she is talking about how no one is free until everyone is free. Right. And so this idea of, that's what they were talking about. They were talking about current events. Again, this is being recorded March 6th, 2024, where Ghana had just passed legislation that was going to criminalize being gay. And you could spend like up to 5 years in jail for like particular things related to that. And I was just thinking about their conversation, the hosts of the podcast who were talking about, can we, the host of the podcast being Black, can we as Black individuals support and be excited for trips to Ghana, the support of Ghana, if it's not for everyone, right? If it's not for queer Black folks, right? And I think that is a really interesting current event connection that you could use. But if you're reading this or listening to this in, a year from now, I do think that you can find another current event that relates to this and ties in. You could also pair it with, the classic text, such as like the lottery or other things that kind of think about that notion of rugged individualism. You could pair it with a lot of history events that kind of think through the decisions maybe a government has made about few versus many. So lots to unpack in there. It's also magical, I think I said. So really fun. Okay. The next one is Elazzo by Darcy Littlebadger. And this is set in a magical alternative America. You'll see a lot of my fantasy preference for these books coming through. Alternative America, it's magical. And I love this quote from authorsoutloud.com that features the author, Darcy Little Badger. So I'm just going to read this. It's the novel features an asexual Apache teen protagonist. Elazzo combines mystery, horror, noir, ancestral knowledge, haunting illustrations. Super cool that the illustration part of that is a piece. And to continue back to the quote, fantasy elements. So I think this could be an interdisciplinary history ELA unit. There's a lot of the artistic side of things that bring the ELA component to life. It is lyrical. It is just beautifully written. The illustrations could make it a really fun art interdisciplinary project as well, I think. The themes to explore include racial justice, national and political justice, because it is about Indigenous nations and family ancestors. Also, the idea of a comparison between real horrors that exist in the world and also fictional and fantasy horrors. I'm thinking it could pair well with a clip from the TV show Lovecraft Country. And I know Lovecraft Country was a book, but I think the TV element is going to be a bit more of a pop culture reference for students and also a bit more engaging, but you could also pair it with the text. I think there are many opportunities with this book to conduct research into the real historical events that are mentioned and really alluded to. They're not mentioned in a ton of depth throughout the story. So having that inquiry-based mind, reading something and saying, hey, I want to know more about that. This is a wonderful opportunity to have students take on that initiative. And in ELA class, maybe they're reading it. And in history class, they are taking a deep dive into like, well, what was that actually about? What was the law actually passed? And what, all that kind of thing. It is a beautiful kind of organic inquiry-based frame and starting point for a ton of research into specifically the United States political decisions with regard to Indigenous communities and the settler colonialism and the settler colonial past and present that exists in the United States. The next one seems even more frivolous, I think, than maybe some of my other choices here that I questioned, but this one I do have a purpose for. So it's One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. And actually I listened to Lauren Graham read it on audiobook. And I was a Gilmore Girls fan. So Lauren Graham reading it was just amazing. I liked it for, in addition to the Lauren Graham reading to me, the interesting and fantastical concept of going back in time to meet and spend time with, be in space with a younger version of one of your parents. So I don't want to give too much away. That's already like a big piece, but this book is a fictional book. It does have that fantastical element. And I like it as kind of even a non-academic, like if you have SEL block or SEL curriculum, this could be a super cool SEL unit that is complementary to it. Or if you don't have a set curriculum, which I kind of love, design your own everything, but if you're designing your own SEL block or you're a counselor who pushes in, this could be a super cool, you even give them just like a piece of this text or present to them the concept or let them listen to an author interview or something about the writing of it. And you could do it there. It could also work for ELA to be more formal and structured. Now, activities that students could do could involve writing or creating in some way. It could be like a video creation or whatever. A historical fiction account of an important figure that exists today or the recent past. So picking a person that close to you, awesome. If you were doing this in a more historical lens, you could definitely say, like, I imagine this person, that is in the spotlight. It's a celebrity. It's a person that is big in politics, whatever. And we're going to go back and like see a formative experience that they had. And what would that formative experience be like? You can write some fiction around that. But also, there are many emotional components of the story. Mostly, I think the idea of coping with one's grief that could be really helpful for students to talk about, to compare their own coping strategies or grief moments with those of the character in the book. It could offer up some opportunities for SEL conversations or journal prompts where they're thinking through and learning about ways to deal with emotion that are healthy.
Hello, this is Leah coming in to talk about today's freebie, the Independent Reading Selection Guide. You can find it now at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/167, Now, back to the show.
All right, the next book is The Book of Delights, Essays by Ross Gay. Oh my gosh, beautiful book. These essays are gorgeous. They are short. They are filled with emotion. The author wrote almost one essay per day for a year, just kind of as a, I think, test, or like, what would this experience be like? Themes addressed in this text are so many, I can't even list them, but predominantly what comes to mind a few months after reading it and what I most remember: strong themes of racial justice, environmental justice, grief, and joy. There is a wide variety of the human experience packed into these pages, in addition to just having a beautiful style. The author writes so beautifully. The author writes in big ways and small ways. So sometimes it'll be like this tiny little thing in their life that they're just noticing and they just want to write about it, right? And then it might lead them to this really big discussion of this really heavy thing. And it all started with this just small noticing of, whatever it is, like a plant and the side of the road. So there's so much potential there. Again, I think really could be part of an ELA unit because it is so lyrical, and they are essays, but they are really poetic, and just the writing style and the authorship. Oh, it's so good. You could unpack pieces for the artistic style. You could also unpack pieces for the depth of content and actually bring it into more of the history or the science space with the racial justice, environmental justice pieces. You could make it, again, part of an SEL or curriculum space where you're really dedicated to the emotional development of your students, and that's the lens you use to focus on it. I think there's so much you could do there. Written by a Black man, Ross Gay has been interviewed on many podcasts, I'm sure, but I listened to his interview on We Can Do Hard Things, and I fell in love with the book before I even read the book. So that's actually a really good listen if you want to hear how it impacted the hosts of We Can Do Hard Things, and how they've been putting this concept of delight into practice in their everyday lives. It was super cool. Okay, next book, Walkable City by Jeff Speck. Now this book, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I have been talking about this. People in my personal life are just like, would you like stop talking about Walkable City, please? It is probably my most referenced book of any book I've ever read. It is something that I think about often because it relates so closely in such detail with how I experience daily life living in a small city. It is, let me tell you about the book. Here we go. So it is a research and experience-based book, really like a handbook almost, for how to make cities thrive. So the author, Jeff Speck, is, I don't remember the name of this, but like a city planner person. And in short, he has found in his research and all of the things that he has advised and the projects that have been completed by the cities he's worked with, that the answer is to make cities thrive, you make them more walkable. And so environmental science would be an absolutely great fit subject-wise, but it could honestly work for like a design class, a social justice, youth leadership, or advocacy course. There's so much potential in here for not just learning about the things he's referencing, but for taking action. And I think really, I listened to an author interview on What Should I Read Next with Jeff Speck, and it was really good because I think it also illuminated his desire for the book to really be a template for folks to actually put it into action. It's not just information for information's sake. Themes that are included in here, of course, environmental justice, also socioeconomic justice. I think his second revision of the book, so if you're looking at multiple editions, go for the second one or the most recent one, because those dive into more socioeconomic factors as well as the environmental pieces. I think the first version, he notes in the book, in the revised version, that there was kind of an absence of that, or it didn't go into as much depth in the first version. There are lots of opportunities here to research further into the scientific phenomena and the studies that he cites throughout the book. So that's a great opportunity there. But it could also culminate, as I said, in an advocacy project. This is where the students would literally use evidence from the book to argue for implementing something. So one of the many ideas in the book that he references as ways to get the cities to be more walkable, to be thriving, literally choose a location, a part of their community, find the appropriate, whatever it is, the town council, whatever, to go advocate for that change in their community, and using kind of like a claim evidence reasoning skill block where they're saying, this is what we need to change, and here is why, because this book cites this research, whatever. Lots of potential there for some really cool stuff. Okay, next we have Firekeeper's Daughter. Now, this is actually at least a duology. I'm not sure how long this series is projected to go, but the second one either just came out, is recently coming out, or soon to come out. Number one, anyways, in the Firekeeper's Daughter series by Angeline Boulley. The main character of this fictional novel is biracial. She's an unenrolled tribal member, and she witnesses a murder and agrees to go undercover in a federal investigation. So again, fictional. The audiobook is excellent, really good. And the author herself is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewas, and she writes about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, or what she calls the UP. Themes include identity and belonging. There's also racial and national justice. So a lot of living adjacent to the reservation, a lot of being in and out of the community as a biracial Indigenous girl, as well as a white girl. Like, her biracialness is both Indigenous and white. And so what does that mean, right? And what are the family dynamics of that? So she talks a lot about the importance and complexities of family and community. She talks about gender-based violence that's experienced in the story, generational trauma, grief, and healing that's related to that generational trauma and grief. Matriarchy, the importance of elders is really critical here, which I distinguished in my brain as maybe not just included in the community, but yes, a piece of the community and something else that could be specifically examined by students. I think, again, this could be a great interdisciplinary history ELA unit to really need to contextualize all of the things that are happening in the story, even though it's a fictional story, with what has happened historically with Indigenous communities, particularly in what is currently known as the United States. The last one I will share is Ink and Bone. This is number one in the Great Library series by Rachel Kane. I liked this book a lot because of the world that it painted, and I love the world creation aspects of fantasy. I've read, I think, 4 or 5 of these series. While they continue to be good, my preference is just the first one is good because of the concept that it raises. And there's kind of a lengthening of the series that I couldn't quite feel myself continuing to get into. So I do think, yes, there's a lot for students to read. If you're having them read for reading's sake, they may fall off after a while if they're like pursuing this independent reading after you introduce it in a class. But Ink and Bone, super interesting, kind of dystopian future novel. And it imagines what the world would be like if the Great Library of Alexandria had not been destroyed. And that started, I needed to have this information because I did not know it. It started with Caesar's troops setting it on fire in 48 CE, or Common Era. So the themes that are happening within this, I think a big theme is, should access to information be controlled, and by whom? Like, who gets to control information? So really interesting question to pose to students. Also, what's the ideal balance of control and freedom? So there's a lot of control. There's a lot of people seeking freedom, and like, what are the values that underpin that? So discussions of, safety and belonging and freedom and access. I think this would be also really cool as an SEL unit that gets at the underlying human needs, right? And so I think of the BASE needs acronym that I always think about. So belonging, autonomy, survival, enjoyment, right? Which are present in which groups and which are not. And where do we land as a society, right? Like, what do we need as a society? So again, interdisciplinary ELA history projects always were exciting with many of these, but also that students could write their own alternative fictions centered around a major turning point in history would be a very cool project based on this book. So the ELA component, of course, with the writing of the fiction, and then the history being like, I have to choose the major turning point. So you need to know about big turning points in history and know enough about the historical context to make that decision. But then they could also use the same structure. So again, both ELA and history, which is that the author inserts artifacts, she calls them ephemera, between each chapter. And so they are fictional because it's a fictional world, but they are quote unquote historical documents, fictionalized historical documents that kind of set the stage for that transition from chapter to chapter, which I think is just a very cool setup, like writing wise. So again, that ELA lens, but then also they could choose relevant historical documents, which means they would have to research historical documents related to the topic or turning point they chose,
Or if they are doing like slight adaptations to those documents, that could also be cool because it's, a fictional alternate reality. So like, how would this important historical document have changed if this specific other thing has changed, right? The turning point didn't happen in the way that we thought it would. Okay, so this has been a super long episode. I just wanted to share these ideas, get your feedback. What did you think about this? For more ideas, I will probably, if you're into this idea of doing book-based unit ideas as episodes on this podcast, continue this, hopefully bringing in some guests. And in the meantime, if you want to consider the books you and your students have loved reading lately, you can kind of follow the same format where you just surface the book, name what's going on in the book, what are the themes, what are the subject or subjects that this would be cool to attach to like a course or develop a unit round for a specific course. And then also think about the possible activities that students could do. For new book recommendations, check out the website We Need Diverse Books. I'll link to that in the blog post for this episode, or listen to a podcast episode of What Should I Read Next? Or an episode of Brave New Teaching, specifically one where they're focused on texts. Usually they will be in the title, and you can just kind of skim through the titles to find one of those. Now, to help you support students to select their own books to read, because I'm all about student choice, I am sharing my independent reading selection guide with you for free. That's going to be linked as well on the blog post for this episode. So you can get all of those links at lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/167. Until next time.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.